Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So it seems like there is so much news going on at the federal level. I just am really disappointed we have to pay attention to the federal government so much. I kind of want to go back to the old days where we could just kind of talk about what happened at the Rotary Club or something. But so yes, I want to talk about the First and the Second and the Fourth Amendment in particular. And I want to talk about current events, what's been going on in the last week or two or month, because it seemed like this is as good of issues. If we were all law students, we'd just be thrilled of all this stuff going on regarding our Bill of Rights. But I'd also want to really make sure we emphasize how either abnormal it is, and the answer is probably yes, and also how unusual or how normal it is. There's always been fights over the First Amendment and Second Amendment and Fourth Amendment. I mean, that's kind of what we do in America for 250 years. We argue about what those words mean. So I don't mean from a legal perspective. If we need to, Jeff can probably jump in. You know, he practiced law all his life. I mean it from a historical perspective. So, you know, I do have all sorts of questions still about Thomas Paine and also the Federalist Papers and you know anonymous speech and public speech and criticizing government speech. And so I don't want to get too wrapped around what's happened in the last couple of weeks, even though those are the questions I'm going to be asking. I'd like you to go, yeah, that's a valid concern, John, and it also happened under some president I barely heard of. So anyway, that's the context for today's conversation. I'd like to knock off five or six easy ones first. I'm kind of kidding, but I want to get to the big one, which is the interface of citizen and government. You know, so these protests and whether they're civil disobedience and what you can say to a federal. You know, I want to get to that big one, but I want to hold it for I don't know 10 minutes. Ready to cover some easy ones?
Yeah,
Does the context of the speech, or it's not speech, discussion sound good today? Are you somewhat familiar with the First, Second, and Fourth Amendments?
I hope so.
Yeah,
Uh,
me too.
we might need to lean on Bart if things get too technical.
Yeah, let's don't worry about it from a legal perspective. Let's
Yeah.
worry about it from a historic perspective. So, first, the Department of Defense. This is a little bit of a news story, so this is a simple old story, but it's a simple one. Department of Defense said you got to swear to only run your articles by us before you print anything or show a show on it. We're going to approve your stories. New York Times has sued them. I think that's news. The New York Times has sued. Do you have any perspective on that? Is it good to have government restrict the only business put in the Constitution, the press? Is that legal? And I mean historical. Has that happened before? Is this a big deal or no, John? John, don't worry about that kind of thing. That's
You're
a
talking
small.
about like prior restraint. You can't publish this if without our
Yes,
permission.
yes.
Um,
Can't be in the
uh,
the Pentagon press corps unless you sign this thing in advance or they get
yeah,
approved.
that's all bad. And you would typically only the only time it has been used effectively and legally in the past is when there was some sort of a war or a mission that required secrecy beforehand.
Yeah, so you think it's kind of just on its face unconstitutional. How about historic? Has it happened any other time when we're not in war? I know the president says we're at war within and all that stuff, but
I mean, the big one would be the Alien and Sedition Acts. We weren't at war, and those were restraints on speech that were outside of wartime. But most people think of those as being bad.
okay, right.
Not a model you would want to follow. Um, uh, you know, a lot. I mean, I guess the thorniest issue is the reason why we have um, the ability for the federal government to go into a locality in the first place, and that is the, we have this problem of what do you do if the local government is not protecting civil rights. And so, therefore, we have a lot of laws that started in the 19th century um, that would allow the federal government to move in to a locality to protect civil rights. But those same, it sets up a tension between the federal and the state enforcement mechanisms. Um,
So sometimes it can be good and sometimes it can be bad, and it makes sense that the parties would switch positions depending on what they're arguing about.
yeah, and we say this is good or this is bad based on who's protecting civil rights and who's attacking civil rights.
Yeah. Okay. So that one though, that should probably be thrown out. That rule, that Pentagon rule. Well, the judge will probably rule, and the Supreme Court
Oh
will say,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, cool. Let's move on.
Yeah, it's not worth,
Yeah.
and
There
it's
are
also
some.
it's bad. I use the word bad because in terms of it being legal or not, it's bad and it's bad long-term policy too. It's bad for a democracy. I mean, our entire system of government is predicated on this linking of culture with politics, and in order for our government to function, people have to believe in it. And if you get rid of that core um, relationship of honesty and transparency, uh, it undermines the culture that makes it possible for democracy to function.
Well, I guess I was going to be a big question I was going to ask later, but let's ask now. Is it constitutional for the president of the United States and other elected officials? Can they lie to the American people? Is that a First Amendment? Their freedom to lie?
I guess you need to define what a lie is.
Just a pure
Depend,
lie. I mean, something that we can clearly see on its face is a
to say
lie.
something, yeah, it is constitutional for people employed by the government to lie,
Okay.
including the president.
And by the way, is there a difference between a federal any elected official and a taxpayer paid employee, an appointed, or can any employee of the federal government just lie to you?
I want to be careful that the difference between something being constitutional and something
Right.
being legal is different. So there are definitely jobs within the federal government where lying is against the law. I'm sorry. What was your question again?
Well, is there a difference between elected officials and employees? Or they have the same constitutional rights that to lie?
Um,
First Amendment, freedom of speech. I'm lying.
well, there are and this is probably pertains to when we get to the other things you're going to want to talk about in the Bill of Rights, but no right is absolute. So there are time, place, and manner restrictions on every right for every American. So,
Most
uh,
people, do most average citizens think through that? I mean, that we spend a lot of time on that in law school, but do you think average citizens realize that? Is it common sense, conflicting rights, and
no,
historically?
um, people tend to believe um, whatever conforms to their particular desires or prejudices. So, everyone wants to believe that whatever they want to do is constitutionally protected. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But in terms of what people know what they want to know. They believe what they want to believe.
Okay. Do you think we're getting better in society? I mean, we have all this
No, no.
information at our fingertips. I mean, we can read Supreme Court cases where 30 years ago we couldn't do that. We'd have to go down to a law library to read it.
Yeah.
Now we can just look at it at our fingertips. So shouldn't we be smarter? I mean, shouldn't we be getting better at this stuff?
We can't as long as we're distracted. And with
Okay.
this, we're all distracted, and we're distracted from good information and reading. So, no, yes, you're correct that we've never had more access to better information, and people are making less use of it than at any other time in history.
Huh. And you think that's a historical fact? You think
Yes,
150
because I
years
mean, in
ago?
the past, if you wanted good information, you got on your bicycle and you rode to the library. And in that time that it took, even accounting for the bike ride to the library, uh, all in, you would be getting better information than you would if you spent that 2 hours scrolling on TikTok about the topic.
Yeah, excellent point. Okay, that's interesting to keep in mind. Let me keep moving. FBI raid on the Washington Post reporter's home. Historically, does that happen all the time? Press is written into the Constitution, but has the government tried to shut down press formally like that?
Um, it depends on your definition of all the time. Certainly within the Obama administration, they went after, the Biden administration went after Trump supporters. Trump went after Biden and Obama supporters. Obama went after Republican and conservative groups. I don't recall Bush doing anything like that. Clinton certainly did. I don't remember Bush or Reagan doing it in a directed way.
Reagan did it at some.
Carter, Carter, no. Ford, no. Nixon, yes. Johnson, yes. Kennedy, yes. Eisenhower, no. Truman, a little bit. Roosevelt, definitely yes. Hoover, no. Well, it depends on how you feel about actual communists and anarchists. So we'll give Hoover a maybe. Um, Coolidge, no. Harding, no. I don't know how far back you want me to go.
I'm just
Yeah,
impressed
I
so
can keep
far.
going back, but uh,
How about the founding? How about the first
Wilson,
five?
absolutely, yes. I'm sorry.
How about the first
You
five?
want me to start from the beginning?
Yeah.
No, in part because I mean one of the things that most Americans underappreciate is just how weak our country was at the time of the founding, and um, and then how well, and through most of the 19th century, um, and this is still sort of true. Our government and our policing power is much weaker than our society and our culture and the so ultimately culture decides how the vast majority of Americans um, live their lives, whether they live their lives in a place that is just or unjust. That's almost always something that's decided upon by the culture of where they happen to be.
Okay, we're gonna get back to some of that. Let's see. Yo, gosh, that's a great question. I guess I'll interrupt the show with Jake since he's going to be leaving soon. Is there a precedent of a sitting president suing himself, so to speak, since the U.S. Supreme Court has said he is the federal government,
Yeah.
executive branch of the federal government? Is there a precedent of the president suing himself? Um,
I don't know. Jake's asking the question, and he's our fact checker. So the first thing I would do would say, "Hey, Jake, why don't you research this?" Because I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Go
Uh,
ahead, Jake.
there are presidents involved in lawsuits, um, but
Jake's ready to jump in.
yeah, go ahead,
Jake,
Jake.
Yeah, this got brought up in our kind of department PLC this morning because what we do for most of that is I listen to my liberal coworkers complain about Trump and how it's going to be the end of the world and we're never going to have an election again. But it did get brought up how he's suing the IRS for $10 billion. And then I had a coworker that did like a quick Google search and she's like, I don't think a president has ever sued the government, but we've had, the government get in lawsuits with the president before, but I don't think it's ever been the reverse where the president is suing the government
I don't
seeking
think it's
for
ever
money.
happened. So
Yeah,
you
I
haven't
mean,
done your own
it's
Google search?
the. I can tell you that it would be surprising if there were anything like this, simply because most presidents before Trump um, placed the presidency so far ahead of their own financial interests or petty personal interests that um, that that they would be ashamed to do something like that publicly. They might try to get away with something to make money or get power for themselves privately. But I mean, I can't think of another president who wouldn't stop himself from doing that out of a sense of shame. So
Yeah,
I
I
find,
concur. And so, Jake, in the future, if you find something online, please tell us. We'll revisit this. Professor, if you look through
yeah.
your history books and find something, please tell us. But no, this is so outrageous and so outside the scope of normal executive powers, and it's just
Well,
crazy.
it's so far outside the sense of shame that
Yeah,
any previous president would have felt.
yeah. Okay. On the rate of the Washington Post reporter, it sounds like it's been done before. You went through the litany of presidents who've done it and haven't, so it's not unusual, and there's lots of case
Well,
law
it
on.
should be unusual. What's unusual is how often it's happening in 1 year. So we don't want to overstate. I mean, this is one of the problems because the a difference of scale at a certain point does represent a difference of kind, meaning other presidents did it a couple of times and they were ashamed of it and thought they could get away with it a couple of times, whereas this is brazen and public. And again, it's the sort of the absence of shame about it, a thing that, you know, Richard Nixon would try to cover this up
Right.
because he would
I remember.
know, like, oh, I should be embarrassed or ashamed of trying to do this. Although the example, I mean, sometimes you think of Kennedy going after the steel executives, that you can do it if the target is somebody who nobody is sympathetic with. So you can do it if you're targeting rich people because, by and large, the American people don't like rich people, so they don't mind if you abuse their civil rights because there's a sort of knee-jerk reaction we have of, oh, well, no, nobody cares about protecting the rights of, rich people, child molesters, pedophiles, whoever is the most unpopular group in society. It's easy to abuse their civil rights.
Yeah, and in this one, abusing the president's own civil rights when he's there, it's just absurd. So most citizens will look at this and go, I hope we're not going to pay for that. God. Okay. This is a merge between the first and, well, two rights within the First Amendment. If you followed the Don Lemon thing, I haven't particularly, but there's a church
Just
that
a
was
few
disrupted.
headlines, but
Yeah, there's a church that was disrupted, and
right.
they went to a judge, and the three judge panel, only one said maybe, but they appealed it, which is a weird legal thing that Bart or Jeff could go into, a very unusual legal thing. But anyway, they got a grand jury to indict Don Lemon now. What about the freedom to assemble in a
Mhm.
church versus the freedom of speech to say, "Hey, pastor, you're also an ICE agent, I guess, and we want to out you, so to speak, to the church." Can
Yeah,
you
your
give
free,
thoughts?
this is clear. Your freedom of speech does not allow you to interrupt the freedom of assembly of someone else. So
Yeah, and
that's
so that's if Don was involved in not just reporting it but organizing it or something. Then yeah,
yeah,
that's probably a crime.
yeah, that he is interfering with the free speech, free political assembly, free religious expression of others.
Cool.
Yeah.
We'll see if we get any other questions about that later. A couple. These are really quick ones. Actually, they're not complicated, but I just don't want to concentrate on it too much today. Online content of social media. There's lawsuits against non-moderation of TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and all those other things. And particularly because of young people and valid mental health issues of the, it's and you say you should have an obligation, and they're saying no, it's a freedom of speech. We don't want to moderate those contents nor be responsible for others. Can you have any thoughts on that? Is that a big issue that we should weigh in on, or
It's a big issue, but it's also one of those issues that lies in the mushy um, realm of politics and legislation. So, Congress could pass for instance, a clarity of disclosure law or something, which they do with like financial statements, or we have in California for auto repair and credit card bills and stuff and home loans. So that say, you have to have a very big, bold, clear disclaimer before using this product. That's something that can be legislated and doesn't, and the courts have ruled doesn't infringe upon uh, free speech. So I guess I would just say, and the other thing is, it also matters what you can prove. If if so, courts often end up working these things out based on the facts of the case. It's not necessarily a constitutional issue most of the time. But again,
yeah, interesting.
if Bart wants to weigh in on this or correct what I'm saying, I would.
We'll go back to it if we want to. I want to get on the
Yeah.
bigger picture
Okay.
in just a sec. This one would be just a 10-second one, Professor.
Okay.
Age verification of online porn sites. They say no, it's a freedom of association, freedom of speech. It limits the ability of people to do what they want in their life. You have any comment on that, or is that just like so gross that we don't even talk about it?
Well, I guess I'll just say that I don't know. I've heard good opinions on both sides of this issue,
Mm.
or on the many. I've heard many different opinions on many sides of this issue. Um, uh, and I'll just say I don't know. B-
Well,
because
these kind of what are they called? Nefarious or not? I don't know. What's the justice that describe porn? Is he knows it when he sees it. It's not a new issue. It's porn and art and stuff has been around for
well, it doesn't
since.
let's if it's too salacious to talk about porn, I'll just sort of tell you where the nub of the issue is for me. And that is that if there were some way, because let's say there is a freedom to publish and there's a freedom to receive um, information, and the problem is any form of age verification must be held somewhere. And I think, if I were to like, idealize what might be possible 10 years from now and where we might get on this issue, might be something like your state government, if they want to restrict pornography, let's say, or, information about, I don't know, firearms, how to build a bomb or something, that uh, you would have to have some sort of state agency that gives you some sort of digital token that says, an anonymous digital token that says you're 18 years old or over. Because, and if that doesn't happen, you're going to end up with, somebody uh, who wants to view 18, 18-year-old and above content, needs some way of proving that they're over 18 anonymously.
Yeah, and that probably you're right. I hadn't really thought about that, but we all probably will be microchipped with an adult microchip versus a kid
Well, that's
microchip, and
why, I mean, and there are things that are possible. One of my best friends is a internet security expert, and he's done a lot of stuff with blockchain technology and digital certification, that I know it is possible to issue someone uh, an anonymous digital certificate linked to a federal ID that would be anonymous and then able to unlock 18 plus content. I know that it's technologically possible.
interesting. Okay, we spent too much time on that. Thank you. Let's get to. I'm skipping one. Let's get to the big picture and then open it up to Q&A. So all the news, because millions of people have been involved in this, and then I don't know, 100 million people have watched it on TV. The conflict between somebody with a sign or standing there with their video or with their phone versus kind of shouting or using these millions of whistles out there. Gosh, it's kind of obnoxious. There are just whistles all over the place now. That freedom of speech versus contact with a federal government employee versus following the federal government employees around versus blocking the federal employee from doing whatever the federal employee is doing. And whether they're actually in the act of the federal government or they're just on their way to it, or maybe they're in the vicinity of the official act. I mean, there's lots of complications to all this. And of course, we've had 2 deaths in the last, I don't know, I guess 10 days now. So this is as hot of a topic as there is in America. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, freedom of Second Amendment now, since he was carrying, search and seizure, Fourth Amendment. I mean, we got all sorts of constitutional amendments all wrapped up in these mass deportations of illegal immigrant raid stuff. So can you give us a historical perspective on this? I
Well,
mean,
can you,
yeah, just the big picture. Yeah, John, this is historic. This is really deep stuff, and it did happen in the 60s, and it also happened before the Civil War. I don't know. Give us some sense of how important this is.
well, it is something that I noted at the time in the 90s and the 2000s, that there were state governments that were openly flouting federal law. And we saw it in places like California that were saying we're not going to enforce federal marijuana law, for instance.
Hmm.
And then when that was allowed to take place, largely because, again, it was a law that a lot of people were sympathetic to, legalization of marijuana. Uh, it opened the door to the politicization of nullification again, which is this idea that somehow an individual state or an individual county or an individual city can nullify federal laws just because they don't like them. And they were making the same arguments that, frankly, the secessionists made in the American South. And at the time, I thought this is one of those times when I was waving my hands and saying, "You need to stop doing this. You have no idea what you're opening up here." Because, of course, as political parties became captured by radicals in the sense of every political primary, the um, the eventual nominee only had to win the primary. So that meant that whoever was the politically the most radical would end up winning the nomination for state and local. We're talking about mayors and county supervisors and state legislatures. That the way to take the most radical position was to advocate that your locality oppose federal law. And for the most part, if the federal government happened to agree with you, they let you get away with it. And I'd say this is one of the trends during the Obama administration. Um, and they often said the right things, but they didn't do anything about it. And this continued apace. It increased during the Trump administration, and then of course, the Biden administration downright encouraged it. And what you have,
Encouraged what? Encouraged what? The overall disregard of federal law,
yeah,
or
this idea that you could have, for instance, something called a sanctuary city, and that you weren't going to enforce federal laws in a particular locality. And now you have a bunch of local officials in specific places who would say, that's how I got into office. That's the reason I am the mayor or the police chief. I was elected in order to do this thing, defy federal law. And when you get a president like President Trump and his, perhaps one of the, I don't know, worst public officials in American history, Stephen Miller, and Christy Gnomes know. I mean, there's some people are more dumb than evil, and some people are more evil than dumb.
you just listed the two you just spoke about it,
Well,
right?
yeah, one dumb versus evil. Um,
I still think Stephen Miller's going to sue you. Are you sure you don't want to be talking about a that's
I,
like
I
a?
mean, he can, but I think I can prove in court that he is.
All right,
I say he is.
all right, but I still think it's dangerous. You'll still have to hire a lawyer, and you're in
Well,
court.
I'm pretty sure that I'm on pretty safe free speech grounds
All
in
right,
using a public official for his public acts. Um,
which is the highest protected constitutional right of free speech there is, says the U.S. Supreme Court.
yes. I
Yes,
mean, I can't say this in class except as it is related to course material. Because if you're a professor, you can say things. Your speech is protected if it relates to course materials. But
Oh, interesting. But that's a different nuance I hadn't thought about. I mean, I just as citizen to be able to criticize an
right,
elected
but you
official.
don't lose your free speech rights outside of the classroom. I am a
Yeah,
government employee,
that's
so
okay. All right, keep
um,
going. That's the interesting
yeah.
point.
Um, so anyway, the what we now have is this situation where the Trump administration wanted confrontation and put the most confrontational people possible in charge of this operation. And it is, even though it looks like a big operation, it is wildly under-resourced. They actually don't have the capacity to do this in even one city. And so in normal circumstances, you would need the cooperation of the local police, and that would make this kind of thing possible. But
Well, but the police chief says they only have 600 police officers, and there's 3,000 ICE and
yeah,
Border Patrol agents,
but
and
I
they're
heard
still saying,
Andy McCarthy on his podcast said this last night. Which is that ultimately law enforcement is possible because of local culture supporting local police. And the smallest number, federal agents rely on, in a best of circumstances, local citizens. And then the next best scenario would be relying on local police and local law enforcement if they are, city, state, county, you name it. But to rely just on federal law enforcement because of the lack of cooperation with local law enforcement, it just is a recipe for disaster,
yeah, but
especially
you're professor,
when,
you're talking because they're not welcome by a vast majority of the population, supposedly, that they're hassled everywhere at the restaurant, at the grocery store, at their hotel, on the way to work, on the way to do a hobby. They just can't. They just are not. They can't do their normal work nor live effectively. You're saying.
and I'm just going to repeat again what Andy McCarthy said yesterday. For those of you, you should listen to his podcast if you, because he's former New York prosecutor, and he was saying if we could somehow magically transport, NYPD in here to do this, they could do this because they have the training and the resources and the ability to deal with, they know how to deal with crowds. They have specific training in order to do so. But in the case of what's happening in Minnesota, it's ICE, but in some cases, it's also Border Patrol people who have been brought up. And those are completely different jobs. And, in police officers have different trainings and skill sets. Um, and none of it makes any of this stuff right. I don't want to say right and wrong, but it does make the conflict inevitable because, and the other thing that's very difficult is that the same people who are often engaging in politically protected speech 2 seconds later are doing things that are assault, but it's a form of assault that normally doesn't get prosecuted simply because it would be impossible to prosecute all that assault. But, you're not allowed to interfere with the uh, uh, a federal officer when they're trying to apprehend someone. I mean, there are juries that again, McCarthy gave this example of a jury that convicted someone of just threatening to interfere. So there have been individual citizens who were convicted of assault and spent a year in jail for not putting their hands on a policeman, but for just saying they were going to interfere.
Yeah, and classic definition of assault, not battery, but assault.
Yeah.
The So, Professor, where is that window? If you were a historian, which is not a good person to advise people of their legal rights, but I want people to have a sense of history. You can go and stand out there and shout at them, can't you? Can't you walk around with a whistle? I mean, you
Yeah,
can.
you can walk around with a whistle. I mean, the key is that once you encounter a law enforcement officer, stop thinking about what the extremes of the law would allow in the microsecond and start thinking about what's the best. I mean, I would just say to anyone who wants to protest, think about what's the best way to protest. Do you actually want this problem solved? Or are you, I don't know,
Performative, maybe.
engaging in some sort of performance or something? If you
Yeah.
actually want this problem solved, what you should be coordinating is massive civil disobedience in which you say, we're going to clog the jails and I want you to arrest me. You insist on being peacefully arrested. You know, um, And the most effective thing you could do probably is, back up slowly to a police officer with your hands behind behind your head interlocked, and then be on your knees and say, like, arrest me, Um,
So, Professor, I really like your advice on that because you've spoken about it before. Because it takes at least two officers off to arrest one person, a non-violent, peaceful, civil, disobedient person. It's not just one; it takes two, and then you have to drive them somewhere. So, I guess you can put them in the old-fashioned paddy wagon or something. But then once you get them somewhere, you have to process them. You can't just like set them out in the parking lot. You have to process them. I mean, it's a lot of manpower to take a person into jail and then
yeah,
keep them there.
and
You
the
got to feed
number of
them.
people who are involved in these protests and who are supporting them, they could easily be organizing their protests to effectively shut down the thing they say they want to have shut down.
So this is your advice to them, or this is just some general
Yeah.
common sense
And
wisdom.
historically, that has been the thing that works. Because the other thing that that does is it means that the public will be sympathetic to you, and the public will start demanding the prioritization of the other thing, it shows a respect for the law because you're saying that we believe this is an unjust law, so we want it enforced against us. And and it's not a call for anarchy, violence, and the destruction of civilization. It's a call for the preservation of civilization and peace.
So, Professor, to take your just to make sure people understand, once you get to the jail, you have to have access to a lawyer, and that takes extra time and extra people to monitor that, and et cetera, et cetera. But then you got to go in front of a judge, and the judge only has so much time in the day, and there's only so many judges. So, at a certain point, the judge has to throw up their hands and go, "We kind of let you need to all go on your own recognizance because we don't have room for you." And then they go out and do the same thing again. I mean, it's a really burdensome cycle. If people were to follow your advice, it's really effective. As long as there's not just 10 of you, but if there's a couple hundred of you in a specific
Well,
jurisdiction,
and the number of people who could be marshaled by a protest movement is in the tens of thousands.
yeah, or even hundreds of thousands,
Yeah,
apparently.
even hundreds of thousands if it was
Yeah.
organized properly. But again, I would say like this is a failure of leadership.
Okay, so you concur that you can't threaten a law enforcement. You have a lot of free speech, but you can't say I'm going to hurt you
Yeah,
now. I'm going to hurt you now. You can't threaten law enforcement. You can say all sorts of. So you can probably flip them the bird. You can
yeah,
probably. I mean, I think courts have ruled on that. At least I don't think the Supreme Court's ruled on it, but several appellate courts have. You can flip law enforcement the bird. It's a little dangerous, but you can probably do that.
yeah. You
Uh,
can insult people all you want, really. There's
Names to call them a whatever and a bad name and curse words, yeah. But you can't touch them, right? You can't touch a law enforcement
uh,
officer at all. You can't like touch them.
yeah, no,
You can't spit on them.
no.
Yeah. And so I don't know why people don't understand that you just can't do that. You can't do that with another citizen either. You can't touch another citizen or spit on another citizen. It's a battery. I
Well, I understand there are some difficult situations that protesters can find themselves in, especially when officers use non-lethal uh, forms. So if you tell somebody, back off or get on the ground, they can do that. But if you tear gas them in the face and then tell them, you know, don't move or put your hands up, that person is going to be dealing with the fact that they've been tased or they've been pepper sprayed. And that's where we see a lot of issues sometimes with police officers giving conflicting orders of people who they have physically incapacitated in some way or another.
Yeah, that's a good nuance. But the citizen can't do that. Citizen can't tase a
Oh,
government
no,
official.
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
I just mean that I'm and I always think about, the maybe the most tragic situation I've ever heard of, which is the case of this guy named Daniel Shaver, who was I don't know if you know this case, but he was a exterminator in his own hotel room, putting away his pellet gun that he uses for work somebody
Oh, is he the
saw
guy
the
on the ground?
telephone through the window, calls the police, and then the next thing you know, he's on the floor in his underwear, and he ends up getting murdered. I shouldn't say
Yeah.
murdered. He ends up getting shot because the officers were actually not convicted, but they were all shouting different things at him, and he was trying to comply with different orders, and one of the
Yeah,
police
that was a
shot him.
brutal video.
Yeah.
Brutal video to watch. Ugh. Yeah, I am familiar with that one. How about following the folks around? I'm having an active debate with one of our past guests about citizens following around ICE, like reporting where they are and following them around town. And he believes that's completely illegal, and I don't think it is actually illegal. I think you can monitor police if you have a scanner, and I think you can drive around following them around. What do you think historically?
Well, if the minute when doxing becomes harassment, it
Ah,
becomes illegal. So,
yeah, that's a good nuance.
so one of the things is if people are following them around, seeking to find out their identity, that and then um, it others use
Yeah,
that information in order to engage in harassment, then depending on your level of complicity and knowledge, you
yeah,
could put yourself in trouble.
I agree with that. But let's take that off the table. Let's just say they're trying to keep illegal immigrants from being captured and detained and deported. So they're
Well,
driving around making noise, making sure everybody in the world knows that where they are.
again, um, you're not allowed to interfere. And when
Right.
you begin interfering, you should know you are breaking the law and you can be arrested and prosecuted for that.
Well, but isn't the interfering the act of whistling, alerting residents within their homes or apartments, knowing there's now law enforcement in the area? Aren't you interfering? I'd say no, but are you saying that could be interference?
It, I mean, that would be a question for the jury. You know, there's no universal answer for this um, because if you're a drug dealer and you're alerting the police that they're about to be that the police are coming, you're a lookout for a drug dealer. That's against the law, you know. But in this case, some prosecutor could charge, I guess
Interesting.
they'll say we're not going to get a conviction on this, but it would be it would be a question for a jury in a court
Okay, it's interesting, but
depending on your level of activity and
I'm fairly certain the courts have had a fairly uniform answer, though, that you can flash your lights in oncoming traffic to worry about a
yeah,
speed
yeah.
trap behind
I mean, yeah, and the court has been trending in. So, sort of imagine it this way: if you're marching up and down the street blowing a whistle, you're probably fine, you know, because that would probably be that. I'm almost certain that would be constitutionally protected speech.
you. Agreed.
But it, once it becomes sort of targeted and directed, then it comes closer to you start inching closer towards that line of interfering with law enforcement, especially when
Uh,
especially if they come to you and say, okay, now you have to stop doing this. You know,
yeah.
and at that point you can choose to comply or not, but once you're given sort of instructions by law enforcement, um, you're on that edge of
And then you're suggesting if you get close to that edge, you better switch mentally into peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience
yeah.
and keep
And as soon
whistling
as
what you
somebody
want, but
gives you an
say,
order that you're unwilling to follow, you better switch to that civil
okay,
disobedience mode.
I'll concur with that. And that's from a layman's Stephen Tootle, or that's from a historical perspective on the right way to engage in culture and government.
I would say that historically that has been the most effective way to protest.
Okay. But you're not advising people to protest. You actually don't have a horse in this race, do you? We're just talking on a show.
I wouldn't want to stop. I mean, I'm my horse is civil rights. I believe so. I
Okay.
certainly I want people to engage in their constitutionally protected rights. Um,
Well,
but
why do you want
I
to do
also
that?
want, just
Why
in
is that?
general, I want human beings to be safe.
Okay, well, those are contradictory. You give me two now. The ability to be safe and secure versus the ability to express your opinion. They nash pretty easily and not complement each other. That gets right into conflict right away. What is the role of the citizen in 2026 concerning our Bill of Rights? Should we all be out there applauding protesters? Should we all be saying, no, this is the law? He got elected on this. Please stop doing what you're doing, execute the law. Or no, it's both. I mean, what's the history answer to this? How do we be
Well,
good?
I think the history answer for me has always been that every time I've tried to participate in some form of protest, I found myself standing next to someone who was saying something or doing something that I didn't want to be associated with.
Me too. Me too.
So,
Every time.
so for me, uh, when I'm standing next to someone who's and I'm standing in a crowd of people who are chanting something I think is just as wrong as the thing that they're protesting, I'm not going to start chanting with them.
Right.
So,
I've written a couple essays on exactly that point. Exactly. Yikes. Yeah, are you trying to help your cause or hurt your cause? I always wonder. Yeah.
yeah. So, I, but at the same time, like I want everybody to, I would love citizens to be engaged and thinking about um, protecting the rights of of their fellow citizens.
Okay, so you like this time in our history, and that's the last question. You
No, do I know? I mean, I guess the thing that I don't like is I'm less sure of the future of representative government in the world, and I don't like that the United States is not not professing or practicing American ideals,
I love that.
and that makes me nervous and makes me sad. Uh,
Yeah.
because even though if I've had my differences with previous presidents, at, at least almost all of them were Americans,
This is
ideologically.
a bold statement. What are you going to say about our current president? This is bold, newsworthy.
I don't know. I mean, it's nothing that I haven't said in the past, but um, he is not a patriot. He does not hold or practice American ideals, and he is undermining American institutions actively. I don't. I've said
Yeah.
that before. I don't think
Yeah,
that's.
yeah, but it is. Yeah, it's so sad.
He's.
Okay,
I
let's
say
open it up.
he is.
Let's.
If you want the headline, he is anti-American.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say earlier, and you really are comfortable saying that the current president of the United States is anti-American.
Yes, he does not believe in. I mean, I don't know if I should say any, but as I run through the what it means to be an American traits, I don't know if he has any of those qualities or holds any of those ideals. I'd have to look at the list again. There might be something in there that he has, but for
Right.
the most part, he doesn't have any of the virtues and he holds none of those beliefs.
I'm so shocked that we're having this conversation like this. I never would have imagined this in my political science and law degree and all my experience for 40 years that we'd be talking about a current president of the United States
Well,
like
I
this.
mean,
Never would.
let's pull out our sheet here.
The pantry.
Let's see if and let's see.
And then, folks who are still with us, get ready to ask your questions as soon as Professor is done.
Does he believe in natural and inalienable rights? No. Liberty? No. Equality? No. Justice? No. Majority rights? No. Minority rights? No. Consent to the governed? No. Democracy? No. Republic? No. Rule of law? No. Due process? No. Separation of powers? No. Checks and balances? No. Federalism? No. Freedom of religion? No. Freedom of press, assembly, speech? No. Private property? No. Virtues, courage, no. Honor, no. Humility, no. Integrity, no. Justice, no. Moderation, no. Prudence, no. Respect, no. Responsibility, no. Vices, cowardice, yes. Dishonor, yes. Hubris, yes. Self-deception, yes. Injustice, yes. Immoderation and extremism, yes. Imprudence, yes. Contempt, yes. Irresponsibility, yes. So he holds none of the virtues, he has all of the vices, and he holds no American ideals.
That is U.S. history professor, PhD, Stephen Tootle. who met
Yeah, if you're looking for the person to, correct, whatever.
docs or something. But it's important to know who you are. You're a prominent, I think prominent, you're more modest, but a prominent conservative U.S. history professor who met me at the American Enterprise Institute, the hallmark conservative think tank in America, trying to inspire citizens to be good citizens. That's how we met. That's what we're doing this show for. And that was your comments on the current president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Your prompt attention to this matter is urged, or however he ends his stuff. Okay, who has a question for Professor Tootle on the First, Second, or Fourth Amendment? We didn't talk a
There was
lot
a
about
question in the chat. Can we get that list? The answer is yes. I got it it's in the materials for high school students from the Bill of Rights Institute is where you get that list of.
And it's on a PDF. I've posted it before as well. So it's pretty, I mean, it takes a couple minutes to kind of find it, but if you're having a hard time finding it, just ask me and I can forward it over to you. Excellent. Who has a question? A live question, please. Jeff, you're the one that prompted this show. Professor, that's the reason I asked Jeff. He gave me a couple topics, and this is one of the ones he wanted us to discuss. Jeff, I'm not sure I gave this justice to what you would want. You probably want to go deeper and lawyerly or something. So, Jeff, ask away or make comments.
Well, I guess I would take some exception with the discussion that we had about nullification of federal law. It is not at all settled that state and local governments have authority, and definitely not settled that they have the obligation to enforce federal law. So, the concept of sanctuary cities, and it's particularly important right now with all of the discussion being, we have the right to protest, and everybody on the right saying, if you're protesting, you're interfering with the enforcement of law and you're doing wrong and you're causing the deaths that are happening. It's your fault that you're protesting. And that's not at all settled. States are not obligated to enforce federal law. And unless the state has undertaken that obligation through statute, they don't have the authority to enforce federal law. So I'd be interested in Bart's comment on that and Professor Tootle's reaction.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Jeff. So let's see what the score is on this. Bart, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, John. I agree with what Jeff just said. People don't realize that law enforcement is actually kind of a cooperative activity between the states and the federal government. Generally, from my experience with talking to law enforcement, at least here in Colorado, is local authorities are not out there arresting people for violations of federal statutes. If the FBI or a federal agency comes to them and says, hey, will you help us arrest these drug dealers? They have joint task forces to do that kind of thing. Generally, states are certainly not generally enforcing the immigration laws. That's the one right now that's the big example. Because they don't have my God, if they had to stop every single human being and ask them for their papers, they would never get anything done. They wouldn't, be catching, criminals who are like robbing people and causing real problems. So I agree with what Jeff is saying. I think sanctuary city right now is a code word. I think there are politicians who have come out and said, I'm not going to have our police enforce federal law, blah, blah, blah. And yes, I think, Stephen is absolutely right about that. I think there are some politicians who've gotten elected that way. And I think that's bad because it adds the fuel to the fire with the code words of saying, oh, you're a sanctuary city. So that's kind of, I guess I'm with Jeff.
Okay, so am I, but let me add my nuance before the professor answer. So Professor Tootle, where I think the issue really arises is not the murderers and the rapists or the big drug dealers, because I think almost everybody, maybe in the 85 to 95% range, wants to get those kind of people off the streets. They're scary, they're dangerous, they disrupt all our lives. I think we're on unanimity of that, so to speak. it's the parking lot, it's the broken tail light, it's the tiny little vehicle vendor benders, it's the littering tickets, it's all the small stuff in society that yes, it's a crime, but if the local law enforcement officer, the deputy or the cop pulls somebody over and says, "Oh, yeah, you're illegal. Now I've got to call the feds on you and you get deported." That's where I think the sanctuary city crux really happens, where there is a significant portion of the population that wants all illegal immigrants gone. By definition, if they're here illegally, they should be gone and follow the rules of America, go back home and try to get back in. Versus there's probably a larger majority that people go, and it's a traffic ticket, for God's sakes. Don't call the feds on them and get them deported. They've been here 30 years. They're married to an American citizen. They got American kids, and they're going to get deported because of a lack of a turn signal. What? And so I think that's where the issue really and we're not having this discussion as Americans. We're having fake arguments about sanctuary city, non-sanctuary, when the crux is, do we really want to punish somebody who's generally law abiding, or do we not? We now give your answer to either Jeff Bart or me or all of us.
I don't disagree with what Jeff and Bart said. What I was describing was the difference between non-cooperation and defiance. You are allowed to not cooperate, but you can't defy federal law. And much of the what goes on between law enforcement agencies is, as Bart said, voluntary. And maybe to put it the way Jeff put it, there's a lot of play in the gears. But I'll give you an example here in California where federal law said if immigration authorities come to the jail and want to take someone, they can do so. And we have a state law that says under no circumstances can you allow that. And so you have a sheriff who doesn't get to just sort of say, I'm not going to have a position on this issue, because he is currently holding someone that the state says he can't give over to the federal authorities, and the federal authorities are saying, you must give us this person.
Well, from a legal perspective, though, that's pretty simple. That's the supremacy clause, right?
Right.
When a state law is in direct conflict with a federal law, the federal law prevails. That's settled law. But I think you have to look at more nuanced circumstances. And it's not true that in sanctuary cities and states, there's no cooperation. For example, when State Patrol shows up to do crowd control for the benefit of
there's no legal definition of a sanctuary city. So
yeah,
how
that's fair. Yeah.
is just up to whatever. It's a made up term.
And I agree with John that it is just as everything else is these days. It's the way that people can polarize as much as possible. It's the term that's used to try to divide as much as possible and ignoring all of the nuances.
Does Bart have a retort to my? It's not even a hypothetical. The real life conundrum faced by law enforcement in California.
Yeah. I don't know, Stephen. I think you're right. I think if I can think of lots of examples where states are holding prisoners in a state or local jail mainly because there's no federal jail right there to hold somebody in. Right. A lot of times feds will arrest somebody and take them to the nearest facility and say, hey, can you hold this prisoner for us?
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I don't know if we can, I guess we don't have to polarize on our little program here. I think states probably should not be passing laws that say that the local law enforcement can't allow the federal government to communicate with them about a person they may be holding, that the federal government may have some kind of a superseding charge against. I think that's kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
So this became an issue in California between the sheriff's association, because almost in California, almost everybody is held in county jail.
County jail.
Um,
Same most places, I think.
yeah.
Mhm.
And what they sort of settled on is to slightly break both state and federal law
Yeah.
and prioritize violent criminals, so that if someone is a violent criminal and they're in the United States illegally, they are prioritized for deportation. And I think that's probably where most Americans are. Like I mean, for me, I try not to advocate too much for specific policies, but like that seems like pretty common sense to me. If someone is, an actual violent criminal, who would be subject to a long prison term in the United States, yeah, get them out.
So, Professor, it gets so complicated so quick in layman's terms, and it's not just in California. It's the public intoxication, it's the minor street fight, it's the DUI, which is a serious issue, but it's the DUI that they get put into
Right.
the county jail, and the feds say that person's illegal. Tell us when you're going to get out, and they say, no, we're not going to tell you. We're busy.
Well, this
And-
is where, if the American people want clarity on this issue, pass a law.
okay, I agree with
Right
that.
now, the law is that person is here illegally and they can be deported. And if
Yeah.
you don't like that, change the law.
I agree with
But I
that.
think it's unfair to say to our federal officials, you can't enforce this federal law. Like, you can.
Well, but
You
the
don't like
locals
it, change the law.
the locals say you can do whatever you want on your own time. We're going to release them, and when they release them, catch them.
Right. But I mean, the reason this has never happened before is because this is a weird social or historical point to make. No, we as a society could not tolerate the complete enforcement of any law. Where
That's true.
it doesn't matter. Like, so to pick this one law and say, on this particular law, we're going to prosecute 100% of the people who break it. There's no part of the American legal system that is prepared to do that. There aren't enough dollars in the world. We only have, I think I heard, we only have 50,000 space for 50,000 people in our federal detention centers for illegal immigrants. And that's because we rest upon this. It's not a fiction. It's this truth that we want our law enforcement at every level of government to only go after the bad guys. Not everyone who technically breaks a law. And our legal system is set up to handle going after the bad guys, not every single person who technically breaks a law.
Yeah, what percentage, Jeff and Bart, are people that plea bargain before they ever reach trial? I mean, it is like, what is it, 85% never go to trial?
Higher than that.
Yeah, I think
Higher
it's
than that.
higher.
So to Professor's point, everybody that's a speeder, well, that's almost everybody. You can't give a ticket to everybody all the time, or you can't arrest everybody for every transgression. Okay, that's a really interesting point, Professor. Kim, we're not out of time yet, but I want to make sure we get to you before we get out of time.
I have so many questions just because I think I'm less informed and less educated than all of you guys on some of
That's
these
not
matters.
true. Jump in.
Well, no, I mean, I don't even know. I still am hung up with the authority of the ICE and Border Control agents that are recently appointed in this haphazard way that's happening. Is there a way citizens can just reject that authority? I don't know. I mean, just because somebody says you're a federal agent, I don't have to say you are. I know who a cop is because he's wearing a uniform and he's been copped by the cops. Like, I don't like this notion of false authority and unmarked individuals wandering around the streets doing these things. It really, really bothers me, and I don't understand why we're letting it happen.
Professor.
Well, this is also, I think Bart or Jeff could answer this. If either one of you jump in. Bart's nodding, or Jeff's off mute, so you go first, Jeff.
Well, I think the cure in the case you're talking about is worse than the sickness. So
Mm,
if you have, I mean, this goes back to nullification, right? If you have individual citizens who are empowered to decide who has authority over them, we pretty quickly don't have an effective government.
really though?
But back to what Professor Tootle said, I mean, that's the role of our Congress and our state legislatures is
Mm.
if we're unhappy about something like that, then we need to have a different law.
Jeff, let me give you an easy scenario. So I think I disagree with you. The Fourth Amendment is very clear. You don't have to open your door to law enforcement without a judicial warrant. Now, there's
Exactly.
maybe some exceptions for an administrative warrant if you're an illegal alien, an illegal immigrant. There may be there's some nuance with that, but for the average citizen, we don't. We of course we want to nullify that order to say I'm coming in, I'm going to break into your home. No, you're not. I'm keeping my door closed. Go away till I see a federal judge sign warrant. You're nullifying their ability to enforce the law.
So there you drew a different distinction. What I thought Kim was asking about was can we ignore people who we don't think have federal authority?
He's
And
talking
and my
ICE
answer was
and Border Patrol
no, no,
agents in
you can't.
mass.
Right, you can't just ignore people who you've decided are not don't have any authority. But take the example of the breaking into someone's house. Uh, the legal result isn't that you get to bar the door and get your guns out and keep them from coming in. It's that when they come in, whatever they find can't be used against you. Now that's a horrible thing to tell a citizen that yeah, they actually can just come into your house, but you have legal remedies on the back end. If you get your gun out and shoot them, you lose those legal remedies, or at least arguably you might. And so it's a this goes all the way back to the first thing that Professor Tootle was talking about. Federal officers in the past didn't want the shame of violating someone's constitutional rights and then being hauled into court to explain why they were so unreasonable, and that checked their behavior. That isn't the case right now. They don't care. The chief the chief judge, the federal judge in Minnesota, who yesterday said he found 95 violations of court orders by ICE. And then his quote was great. It was, I think in January, ICE has violated more court orders than some federal agencies have in their entire existence. That's instructive. The answer isn't that you get to bar the door, but we're supposed to have a functioning government that holds those people accountable for violating your constitutional rights.
Yeah. And the thing that really bothers me too is I have a lot of Hispanic family members. My grandmother is Mexican, so I have a bunch of cousins, last name Flores, Hernandez, Navarez in California. And in California, there was a court case and it's Nome versus something that was decided favorably that speaking Spanish is probable cause. That's insanity to me.
Yeah,
So I don't know. It's the authority
agreed.
thing I'm
I agree
struggling
with
with.
you.
And
There
I'm
I
a
is
agree
rule
with you. And
person.
that's what the
a
due
weird.
process clauses are for, right? They're so that we have that recourse,
Yeah.
so that we have that thing to point to in a federal or state action that they did not follow a due process and give us the right to be heard, and the right to um, yeah, the
But
right to be heard, I
Bart,
guess.
I want
Can I
somebody
ask?
there's a distinction that I want to make sure we get right, and Bart can probably explain this better than I can. An Article 2 court versus an Article 3 court, an administrative court versus
Yeah.
a real court.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I can here real quickly, kind of in a nutshell. The federal agencies are considered, they have Article 2 power in essence. And I kind of overstated that because, Jeff and I can, I don't know, split hairs on that because some people say that, oh, the president is the unitary executive and whoever the president is actually has all this authority. I don't really believe that's true, but Jeff's shaking his head too. But Article 2 judges, there's actually a whole lot of debate about this going on. We haven't actually had a direct court case on it, and I think it's
actually
probably
one, and I looked this up yesterday. I think it's called the Central District of California. Article 2 courts, that's the only place in the United States where Article 2 courts don't have authority because of one court decision that hasn't yet been, but it's like, and it just happens to be like the area that includes Los Angeles. But it goes up to, if Jake was still here, I'd say Google the Central District of California. But okay, sorry, just to.
Yeah, no, I think there's going to be a court case on this because the U.S. Supreme Court lately has been kind of taking power away from federal agencies, but the Homeland Security Department has kind of gone on steroids currently with what they're doing. I mean, they're basically killing people, and they're just going, "We don't care." You know, somebody in that agency is telling these people that it's okay to sort of shoot whoever you want to, if you want to. And it's like, that really bothers me. What I'm getting afraid of here in Colorado, particularly, and I know we're trying to speak to a national audience and not every state is the same, but in Colorado, we have a stand your ground law, for people invading houses. And my concern, and this could be a reason why ICE is not operating here right now the way they are in like Minnesota, is that, if somebody starts breaking down your door and they draw a gun, if they don't have a legitimate judicial search warrant, under Colorado law, you might be able to pull out your gun and start shooting.
Yeah, I'm Irish Mexican. Katie, bar the door.
Yeah, and I know that's a horrible thing to say, but I don't know a way around that right now because that is the law in Colorado. I mean, we've had court cases where charges have been dismissed against people because, and I've not heard of one that involves law enforcement directly, but almost any case where someone is breaking into your house here and you shoot them, you're not going to be charged with murder or some crime. They're going to they're not going to prosecute.
Many states have version of that castle doctrine or stand your ground, defend your
and a lot of states have that.
So, Professor Tootle, any retort to that? And by the way, do address the Second Amendment. I'd be curious on your thoughts about the issue in Minnesota. But I mean, we do all have the ability to carry in most states a concealed weapon around. A lot of people don't like it, but it's the law. Can you address the freedom of speech and freedom of carry and conflict with federal agents? Can you throw that into your answer as well?
Well, I'm not familiar with the concealed carry laws of Minnesota, but like you said, almost every state has some kind of concealed carry law. So you're not necessarily breaking the law when you are engaged in free speech and carrying a firearm. However, California, again, I can't speak to other states, but the concealed carry rules in California are very clear about the kind of activity you can engage in while you have a firearm on you. So, for instance, in California, you have an obligation to retreat, and they're very strict about how you interact with law enforcement when you have a concealed firearm.
I can see that in California. I'm not sure that's true in most states, though. But I can see that law.
In other words, in California, they show us a video of somebody spitting in your face, and what you are legally allowed to do is you must walk away. You cannot you essentially cannot get into a fight with anyone if you have a firearm. You can't touch anyone or put yourself in a position. You are obligated to retreat everywhere in the state except for in your own home. So, in order to know what we would have to know what the laws are in Minnesota in order to know what his obligation would be. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. All right. We're almost out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Jeff, I want to go back to you since this was your topic. What major thrust do we wish citizens to care about in the First, Second, and Fourth Amendment? What better conversation should we be having, and how does the professor help us have those better conversations?
Geez, I wasn't ready for that question. I have to figure it all out right here on the spot.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Now you know
I
how I feel every week.
exactly.
yeah, yeah, but you chose to be unprepared, right? That was part of the deal.
Right.
Um, I I would say I think that the the professor's right that the most effective way to protest is civil disobedience. But I think that's somewhat impractical for most people because I simply don't want an arrest on my record, no matter how righteous it might have been. So I think that people are doing the right thing in mass by protesting, by standing and watching, particularly videoing, because it is preventing the administration from creating the narrative that most of us, otherwise would assume was true in the past. And so those are all good things and
So,
should
Jeff, though,
continue.
let me interrupt you. Millions of people have been out protesting away from law enforcement. They have a big protest and a rally, and I've been to a dozen of them or more now in the last year to observe, not to protest, to observe them, to document history, so to speak. There's probably thousands or tens of thousands of Americans that have been right in the face of ICE and Border Patrol. It's a very small subset. There millions are protesting peacefully away from law enforcement, and then there's some that are. It has to be at least be in the thousands, but I think it's probably tens of thousands across America that are whistling and following and causing slowdowns of ICE and Border Patrol. It's those folks. I love Professor Tootle's advice on civil disobedience. The thing I'm really scared about is this is for anyone. I'm really scared about the escalation of violence between sides that we
Yeah.
could spiral out of control and go into anarchy and then the insurrection act and then seizing ballots and holding off on the election this fall. It's too dangerous. We can't hold an election this fall. Congress is just going to be stayed. There's could be a really bad scenario happening in the next 9 months. That's what I'm most concerned about, which is why I like Professor Tootle's option. It's this conflict that is really, any violence is really concerning to me. Anyone have a reaction to that?
I guess I do. And in one sense, we could say the protests were successful because already the Trump administration has deployed someone who believes in deportation but isn't a moron to take control of the situation. And so you will, I predict, I mean, I know I should never predict anything, but see a de-escalation of, you should see a de-escalation in these operations. But so that's the sort of good news. The bad news is if and here's the other thing. I don't think we'll see this again. Because I think that the people who were in charge of this, getting it to this point, are probably going to be marginalized within the Trump administration from here on out. I mean, at least a little
You're
bit.
talking the attorney general and the head of
Yeah.
Homeland Security.
Well, Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
And well, Stephen Miller, number
And
two,
Corey
three.
Lewandowski and Kristi Noem and yeah. And they might keep their jobs for a little while longer, but eventually they'll get, they'll be shown the door. Um,
Let me interrupt you. Do you think that's true of Stephen Miller? I saw somebody characterize Stephen Miller as the software that's operating Trump's brain.
I don't know that that's true, but I think I don't think he's going to leave. I think he's still going to be in the administration and saying outrageous things, but he's not somebody who knows how to accomplish things. He can have a job and a Twitter account and a Truth Social account, but I don't know that he will be in charge of executing actual policy. I just don't think he can. I mean, in a lot of ways, this was incompetently run, and some of these issues arose from the fact that it was just incompetently run. And I don't know if the chief of staff would tolerate this again, in terms of just the incompetence. I shouldn't say incompetence, because sometimes you have people who are good at one job and they're just thrust into another job because Trump says, make this happen, and
Sure.
they just don't know how. And he moved, so you get people who are moved from job to job, have no idea what they're doing, and they're being told like, make this happen yesterday. And
Well, but do you think, Professor, do you think the Trump himself has the ability to distinguish between competence and not? I'm telling you, I do. In all my professions, there are lawyers that are just sharp legal eagles that you just have to respect them whether you disagree. And then there's a bunch of average people. Same
no,
in the
I
military.
think
Same
that
in
he's
the
particularly unskilled at identifying and promoting talent.
yeah. So he'll replace Miller with somebody else who's weird and odd and
He likes people who look a certain way and sound a certain way, but he doesn't necessarily, and he often um, misattributes uh, condition with skill. So he'll look at somebody who has a lot of money and say, this person must be smart. And because I don't know, got lucky, inherited a bunch of money, whatever, and you look a certain way, you must be able to do anything, which is absolutely not true. Somebody who's actually good at discerning talent and promoting talent would be, I mean, you think about somebody like Dwight Eisenhower or somebody like George Marshall, maybe the best person who knew how to put people in a position to succeed. I mean, Dwight Eisenhower, I mean, Curtis LeMay was insane. And yet Eisenhower knew, I need this nutcase if I want to build an Air Force. Because he knows how to build an Air Force, but don't put him in charge of anything else because he's nuts. Being able to use people for what they're good for, but at the same time recognizing that in 1960, sorry to keep, I mean, I guess this is what I'm hired for, right? The history stuff,
right.
but like, he's Dwight Eisenhower also in 1960 is still saying there's something about Nixon that's immature. He's incredibly skilled. He has all these gifts, but like he's just not, wise yet. And so he was an incredibly astute evaluator of skill and talent. And Trump has none of that ability. Uh, I mean, putting Elon Musk in charge of things, you should absolutely put Elon Musk in charge of Tesla, which is a very unique company that made money in a very unique way, and was able to innovate by wasting a lot of money, but also hiring and promoting talent. But that he has no ability in government. And I understand that there's often this, we believe that somehow government should run like a business, but government is not a business. The money is votes in government are what money is in business, and um, the it's like it's why communism doesn't work. It's why socialism doesn't work. Um, the prices in government are hidden. So you can't use uh, money is not going to solve the problem because costs are often hidden in representative institutions. Anyway, subjects for another day. But my point is he's bad at evaluating talent.
Yeah, agreed. All in favor, say aye. Yeah, it's so we're in a bad spot, but you've also given us some optimism. They actually think this isn't as bad as we think it is, right?
Well, the thing is,
I said we could seize voting machines and go into civil war, and you took us right back to no, this is actually a good thing.
well,
That
it's
needs to be a full conversation.
yeah, that
Yeah,
needs, but because he cares only about how things look, what's going on in Minnesota makes him look bad and incompetent. And so he doesn't like that. And when Europe stood up to him and said, look, if you're going to invade Greenland, we're just going to put troops there. So you're going to be attacking every country in Europe. He backed off. And like most bullies, once uh, once people stand up to him and demonstrate his incompetence, he's forced to move on. But his particular skill is that because he has no shame or honor, um, he is generating so many scandals that we're already on to the next one.
Yeah,
We never fully digested Greenland, and we were on to Minnesota. And we're not, and just as he's backing off from Minnesota, he's seizing ballot boxes in Georgia.
Yeah. Okay. So we're neither optimistic or pessimistic. We just have to keep doing our role well as citizens. Right?
Yeah.
We
But
have
that
to,
never ends,
never ends. We got to do our role. Okay. We are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Tootle. Well done. Really appreciate your time. We're taking next week off, so we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, Professor.
I'll be in Kansas City next week.
Hooray! I hope you fly over and say hello. No, I guess you're not flying.
I'll be in Denver for like an hour.
Well, maybe I'll come and see you if you want to go
They
out of
have lunch at the airport, right?
There we go. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day. Thank you for your time.